Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Harshita again, and today I'll be talking about decision making. Okay, so the topic for today's video is decision making, and I'll be talking about three very important aspects about decision making. First is what is decision making. Second is what are the things that you should keep in mind before making any decision, and the third one is how to define a decision. Okay, because defining a decision is probably the most important step before making a decision. So let's get started. Okay, so what is decision making? So basically, decision making is a process of selecting a choice from a range of possible options with the goal of achieving a very specific objective. Okay, so if you look at this definition, basically for any decision making, there is an objective which you want to achieve. Okay, there are various options of choices by which you can actually achieve that objective. Okay, there are various ways essentially of achieving that objective, and you have to choose that which of these ways would be the best suited for you to take to achieve this objective. Okay, so this is about decision making. What is it? Okay, now second, I'll talk about the things that you have to keep in mind before making any decision. So there are essentially 5 very important things that you have to keep in mind before taking any decision. First one is be clear about the objective. Okay, so basically the idea is, because if you have an objective, right, and if you're not very clear about it, so you don't know like like what will be the best decision to take to reach that objective, right? It's like saying, for example, if you don't know the destination, okay, you will not be able to evaluate the various paths that lead to that destination, right? So essentially the objective is your destination. You have to make sure that you know the objective or the destination really well, so that you can actually evaluate from various options to attain that objective. Okay, so this is the first very important point. The second point is choose who decides and who doesn't. Okay, so what does this mean? So the idea is, when you take any decision, right, there are many people you might consult to, okay, you might gather information from, right? There are many people whose suggestions you might take, whose opinion you might want to hear out, right? But ultimately you should be very clear that who will take the final decision. That is very important, because there will be so many people who will be guiding you, telling you some information which you need to know, and a lot more things, right? But you, in your mind, you have to be very clear who you have to consult, and all those things is fine, but ultimately who will have the final say in taking the decision. Third point is reduce ambiguity and risk by gathering information. Okay, so for taking any decision and evaluating the various options for reaching the objective, it is very important that you actually gather a lot of information along the way, right? The more information that you will have of these various options, the more informed decision you will be able to make, right? Because when you want to take a decision for reaching any objective, right, there will be a lot of ambiguity also, which is the best way and like how to go about doing things, right? But the more information that you gather, it will help you resolve that ambiguity, and you'll be more confident about the decision that you're taking, right? And also there are higher chances of success of that decision. Fourth point is make a choice and make it known to all, right? So because what happens is that when you make a decision, right, and especially for the decisions which impact a lot of people, like say if you're taking a decision about some project in a company, right? So what happens is, if you make a decision, right, that how it is to be done, and especially if it impacts a lot of people, it is very important that what you have decided gets known to all the people who are actually impacted by that decision, right? So basically, for example, say if there is a project, right, and you have taken a decision of a way of execution that, okay, from now on this thing will be done, right? And so there are various people who will be involved in doing that thing, right? And if they don't know like what is the decision taken, right, what are they supposed to do, okay, so they will not know it, right? And hence they will not act in the way as you expected them to act, right? So it is very important that you actually make your decision known to everybody, right? So that everybody's actions and thoughts are in line with what has been decided, right? And now I'll go on to my fifth final point, which is evaluate and adjust basis new information. So what happens is, like, say you have taken a decision, right? And taking a decision, even though if it is like you have a lot of information and everything, right, but still in some cases, especially in the cases where like there's a lot of ambiguity and the decision making is quite complex, right, it might happen that some factors are actually missed out unknowingly at the time of taking the decision, right? But when the decision is being executed, when like people are working basis that decision, it might happen that a lot of different ground realities or like something else, some other aspects which were not thought of earlier might come up, right? And there might be some things which might happen which were not actually expected when the decision was being taken, right? So it is very important that once the executional decision starts to happen, and then we have like different checkpoints, we keep on evaluating that, okay, was our decision correct, is our decision correct, or okay, this was an aspect that we did not even think of. So let's do one thing, let's just take a step back and reevaluate things and make adjustments in the execution, and then execute accordingly, right? So it is very important because, okay, so even though our decision is taken something, it is not written on the stone, right, that you cannot change it, right? Ultimately the thing is that you have to do which is the best for the organization or like for reaching the objective that is supposed to be reached, right? So in the process, if you have to make any adjustments, even if the decision's execution is happening, that is fine, you can still adjust basis the new information that you get along the way. Okay, so these were the things that you have to keep in mind before taking any decision. Now I'll be talking about a very important thing, which is defining a decision. So why I'm saying it is very important is because many times it does happen that you want to take some decision, right, but you are not clear about the various aspects of that decision. Okay, it might happen because especially for the complex decisions, especially for the irreversible or partially irreversible decisions, you have to think about it from various angles, right? And if you haven't properly thought through it, you might not be very confident in taking the decision. Okay, and it is also likely that the decision might not succeed, right, if it is not well thought through, especially in very complex situations. Okay, so it is very important that you define the various aspects of the decision and think about it accordingly. So I'll be talking about defining the decision now. So there are 4 very important things that you have to keep in mind while defining the decision, while actually figuring out the various aspects that you have to think about. Okay, so the first is, what is the desired outcome? Okay, so what does it mean is, as I mentioned, you have to be very clear about the objective. Okay, what do you want to achieve, right? What will happen if the decision taken is correct? Okay, what is the final destination of the various of the paths that you're evaluating to reach the objective, right? How does the destination look like? What will be the final outcome, right? What is the objective of the entire decision making, that activity that you are doing right now, right? So you have to be very clear about the outcome, very clear about it, because then you'll have more clarity. You'll be able to take like steps accordingly, like you can then gather information accordingly, right? Your thoughts will be much more organized if you know about the final outcome, right? So it is very important that in your mind the final outcome is crystallized really well. Cool. Now the second point is, what are the possible choices we can choose from? Okay, so whatever I'm talking in this video, of course you might have guessed now that like I am talking about things, how to analytically approach a decision making process, right? Because many times it does happen that we take decisions from the gut, right? I just feel right, I just feel this option is correct and let's just go ahead and do this. Many times it does happen, right? Many times it does work as well, but in complex scenarios it is very important that you have properly thought through things. Okay, so before we actually decide that what path we'll choose to reach the objective, okay, it is very important to list down the various paths. Okay, we should list down that these are the various options that we can choose from, and that will help us to attain the objective, right? So listing down the possible options is always good, because then once it is written down somewhere, right, so it is very much more convenient to actually evaluate these various options. Okay, so writing down things is like very important. Okay, and once you write down things, once it is on paper, right, you can just see it, think through it much more clearly as compared to if all the options are in just your mind. Okay, so just write down the various possible choices that we can choose from. Then the third step is, what is a timeline for taking the decision? Okay, so many of you must have heard of the Parkinson's law, right, that work expands to fill the entire time it has, right, the person has, right? So and of course, like decision making process, because it is generally very cognitively intensive activity, it might happen that like subconsciously people might not be they might be like inherently kind of procrastinating or delaying the decision making process, because it is very cognitively very intensive. People might not be actively consciously doing that, but for any cognitively intensive actions, your mind tends to delay that action. Okay, that is there. So it is very important to have a proper timeline, that okay, we have to decide this thing by this time, right? So that all the information that you want to gather before taking the decision, all the evaluation of the steps, or the evaluation of the various choices, whatever is to be done, like whatever you want to do in the decision making process, you have a timeline that okay, by this time, by this date and time, we have to decide something, right? So if you have a timeline, that helps a lot in actually making sure that the progress is happening as expected. Okay, and then the fourth point is, who will this decision affect? Okay, so this is very important, because especially for very complex decisions taken in organizations, it might happen that your decision is affecting a lot of people, right? Some people might execute it, and it might affect, the decision might affect others in some other ways, right? So it depends on decision to decision, but it might happen that it affects certain people, right, positively or negatively, like whatever basis, whatever the decision is taken. So it is very important to think about who are the people who are actually affected by this decision. Okay, and how are they affected by this decision, right? This step is very important, because what happens is, like when you take a decision, right, especially in an organization, if you feel that this decision shall affect, like say, multiple people, right, so you may want to include them in the decision making process itself, right, so that there is a lot more acceptability of that decision among these people who this decision is impacting, right? So then you can actually further think about the course of action, that okay, who to involve in the decision making process, whom you should gather information from, whose opinion you should take, and who should actually have a say in the final decision making, right? So all these things you can think of if you have thought about this aspect, that who will this decision affect. Cool. So these were the 4 points of defining decision. So as I mentioned in the start of the video, that I'll be covering decision making definition, what is decision making, things to keep in mind before decision making, and also how do you define a decision. Okay, so the next time when you have to take any complex decision, just take a paper and pen, okay, and just write down all these 4 points that I mentioned about defining the decision. Okay, and just see the stark difference in the thought clarity that you'll achieve when you write down things and think about all the aspects. Of course, the 4 aspects about defining a decision that I mentioned, these are the must-have things that you should obviously think before taking any decision, complex decisions I'm talking about. And apart from these 4 points that I mentioned, of course, basis the kind of decision that you're taking, there might be other points also that you might want to consider. So yeah, like that's fine, that's dependent on the kind of decision that you have to take. But yeah, at least these 4 points are things that you should definitely keep in mind before taking any decision. Cool. So this was all I had to say in this video. If you have any questions about anything, please feel free to write in the comments below and I'll take it up in the further videos. Thank you so much. Bye bye.